How's it going, everybody? Jack here in the garden today with Jackie and Emma, and I wanted to talk just a little bit about why we went with raised beds over in-ground planting. I was recently in a Facebook group and somebody made a comment about why they kind of asked the question. They're like, why would you make raised beds that weren't 4 feet tall? Because if they weren't 4 feet tall, there was no advantage to the raised beds over a regular in-ground planting, because from a comfort standpoint is where they were coming at it from. And it made me stop and think and want to make this video about why raised beds are so much more than just a comfort. That is one aspect of it, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. But I wanted to talk about why we went with raised beds. So behind me, you can see our raised bed garden. We have 6 4x8 beds and 2 4 foot by 4 foot beds. I made all these beds a couple years back, three years. I think this is going to be our 3rd year with the raised beds. I'll put a link to the video up in the corner about how we made these. At the time, they cost about $30 each for the 4x8 ones. Now, with the price of lumber, they would be a little bit more, but you can still make these things fairly inexpensive compared to buying an off-the-shelf plastic or metal or wood raised bed from the farm store. So I'll link that video up in the corner. When we bought our property, the area that these are in was actually sunken almost 2 feet lower than you see it right now. And this is where they had the original garden. What we found when we planted that garden the first year was that it was overly wet. The soil was very acidic. It was rocky. It was generally not a good place for a garden. You can see there's a big pine tree up there that is throwing a whole bunch of shade on the garden right now. And that's not necessarily a good thing either, something we can remedy in the future. But the soil itself, it was wet, it was acidic, it was not good. So we knew we wanted to put the garden here. This was a great place for it. It's right off the back of the house, but we needed to make some changes. And those changes involved bringing in 2 dump truck loads of dirt that we brought back here and leveled out. Getting 2 dump truck loads of great planting soil back here would have been pretty expensive. So we went and found the cheapest fill that we could. It had dirt in it. Obviously it had dirt in it. You big dummy. It had sand in it. It had rocks in it. It was not something that you would have wanted to plant in. So when we knew we wanted to put the garden back here, raised beds were a great option for us, because with a raised bed, you can start with the soil you want to. You can pick whatever you want to go in there. If you want an asparagus bed, you can use a sandy soil. If you want a really, rich, dark soil, you can put that in there. It's really up to you when you have a raised bed. So that's kind of the biggest advantage of raised bed gardening, is no matter where you are, whether your soil is rocky, whether it's sandy, whether it's full of clay, you can put down a raised bed, fill it with the soil you want, and you can get gardening right away. Even if you have decent soil that needs amendments added to it, those amendments are going to take time. If we had tried to put lime in the soil and de-acidify it, that's going to take 2-3 years. So if you want to get gardening right away, filling raised beds is going to be the way to go. We went with a 50-50 loam and compost split that I was able to get from a local landscaping company. Each one of these beds I constructed to take about 3 yards of soil. So you're looking at overall, I think we spent around $400 on dirt for this. However, if we had spent that same amount of time and money over a couple years getting the soil to where it needs to be, we would still be super low, and the water table would have been too high and it would have been too wet for us to plant here. A big advantage to raised beds that not a lot of people think about is that they do allow you to get gardening earlier in the spring each year as well. There's a couple things at play here. One, because the beds are raised up, typically they're going to thaw faster than if they were in the dirt. Your ground can hold on to that cold for a really long time. So if you live in a place where your ground freezes every year, a raised bed is going to thaw out quicker than if you had your garden in the ground, and it allows you to start working that soil a little bit sooner. But you can also build a raised bed greenhouse, which we've done before. I'll put a link up in the corner to that. You can build one of those raised bed greenhouses, and in addition to having it thaw out quicker than it would if it was in the ground, you can get some stuff actually in your raised bed sooner And then once you don't need that greenhouse anymore, you can just pop it off and stow it on the side. We've done really well with planting leafy greens and lettuces and things like that way earlier in the season than we would have been able to if we didn't have the raised bed combined with the small hoop house on top. Once we had that compost and loam mixture in here, we're able to come back yearly and add amendments to the soil as we need. We don't need to add a ton of them because our soil is pretty fertile, but typically what we'll add at the beginning of each season is we'll add a mixture of wood chips and composted chicken manure that we get from our chickens. We have wood chips that we get delivered from a local tree care company. At the end of each fall, I will take our chicken manure that we've stored up all summer, and I'll mix it with a bunch of wood chips. I'll let them sit over winter. And then every spring what I'll do is I'll come back and I'll take those wood chips that have been composted with the chicken manure, and I'll just top coat everything and really lightly kind of integrate them into the top of the soil. I don't want to till anything. We try to not till as much as we can, but I do want to get some organic matter and some nutrients back in the soil, and this has been working out really well for us. And that brings me to another reason why I think raised beds are so cool. If you look at maintaining a raised bed and amending the soil in a raised bed, your amendments and anything you do to that soil, it's going to be more efficient than if you were doing it in a standard garden. And part of the reason why I say that is if you top dress a raised bed with composted manure or wood chips, you're only applying that amendment to the raised bed itself. It's not going to get washed down into the water table. It's not going to get washed out to the side, to the rows that you walk through in a regular garden, which are typically going to be more compacted and almost funnels for water. I find that in raised bed gardening, I use a lot less of any of the amendments that I need, whether it's wood chips or fertilizer or compost. I'm putting it where I need it and only where I need it. And for some reason, I can't necessarily explain it because it seems like you would use the same amount between a raised bed garden and a traditional in-ground garden, but it just ends up I use less, which is cool because it's more efficient. That also goes right into the fact that raised beds tend to be easier to maintain overall. You know, when you chunked this raised bed down on the ground and you filled it with soil, you were starting with a fresh canvas. You didn't have grass there that was going to want to push its way up through and regrow and kind of infiltrate your vegetable bed. Obviously, typically whatever soil you buy, there's going to be some weeds in it, and you do have to contend with that. But because it's a raised bed and it's starting essentially from zero, you can pick weeds as you go and pull them right out of the ground. And, you know, with the exception of some crabgrass here and there, we haven't had anything that's really taken a hold of a raised bed and tried to take it over. On a perennial raised bed like the strawberry patch that we have behind us, it tends to be a little bit more of an issue because you're not going in and getting as aggressive. But with a regular raised bed where you're planting annuals in it, like the root vegetable patch that I have right next to me or any of the other ones behind me, weeds are just, it's not as much of a problem. And that'll kick it to the third and arguably biggest selling point for a lot of people. And that is the fact that raised beds are simply just easier to work in. I know that this whole video started with me saying there's more to raised beds than just being comfortable to work in, but it is true. If you build a raised bed, you're not hunched over on all fours digging in the dirt. And some people like that. That's fine if that's what you're into. But for Jackie and me, we found that if it was easier to work in the garden, we would spend more time working in the garden, which means more food for us, whether that's more time weeding, whether it's more time planting, whether it's getting more plants in the ground. If this is easier to do, you're going to spend more time doing the things that you need to do in the garden. You know, gardens are not hands off. They're not, you know, throw it in the ground and put it out of mind. You need to maintain these things. If they're easier to maintain, if they're more comfortable, if you're not on all fours, if you can, you know, sit on the edge of one garden bed and work in another, it's going to make your life easier and you're going to have a more productive garden because of it. Don't write off the fact that raised beds are easier to work in or more comfortable to work in, because they are, and it's a big part of it. But there's a whole host of other reasons that if you're not considering raised beds already, you should be looking into it. Hopefully this video has given you a few things to consider about raised beds if you're not already using them. We really enjoy using our raised beds. For a long time, I was a big fan of planting in the dirt on the ground without a raised bed. But now that I've had these raised beds for a few years, They've really allowed us to maximize what we can do with this small space. We are planning on expanding this garden in the future, but as of right now, I'm really excited with what we do here. And if you're not already considering putting in a few raised beds, maybe think about it. Thanks for watching the video. If you're not already a subscriber, I encourage you to head down below and hit that subscribe button. We do a whole lot of fun stuff here on the farm, whether it's how-to videos, whether it's vlogs of what goes on in our day-to-day lives. We're always cooking up something interesting here, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. Hope you're doing well and have a great day. Bye.